Okie dokie. So, hi everyone, and I'm just going to facilitate this conversation today. Not that I'm in charge of it, but so that we can share this with the world. I think the starting point could be that capitalism has brought important contributions over the last decade. So these include flourishing of technologies used for renewable energies, alignment with the necessity of low carbon economies. We've got medical breakthroughs that have substantially increased life expectancy across the globe, along with wealth creation and the growth of emerging economies that has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty. But one could argue that these developments have come at high cost. So humanity is now facing at an unprecedented scale several social and environmental problems that are intrinsic to the very nature of the current capitalist model. Its incentive structures and how private players prioritize maximizing profits over an approach that prompts social inclusion and environmental resilience, for want of a better word. One could argue that, and in fact I have argued, that for-profit economy doesn't answer to societal needs. There are concerns about the increasing poverty and income gap, social exclusion, the degradation of social values in the member states of many places, not least the European Union and the United States of America and globally. New alternative models have been emerging around the world for the last kind of 7 to 8 years, and they seem to be based on diverse social values instead of monetary values, and include different kinds of drivers like gifting, exchanging, renting, sharing, helping. And these new models may have the potential to enable better social welfare standards and ensure a higher level of social cohesion. So one question we have is, can we create an empathetic alternative to a capitalist system? A less academic version of that is, how changeable is our economic model? And maybe a better way of putting it is our economic model serving us optimally? And there are many ways of going into and out of those rabbit holes. And so what I thought we could start with is just a roundtable of what everyone's take is of whether the system we are in is the one that will enable us as a race and as a planet to thrive and not leave as many people behind. And we can go into it from that angle. And if you have a different approach, then that's also valid too. Emma, I'm going to start with you. What's your take?
What's my take? Well, I think it's really interesting that we've never had it better, yet we're all more unhappier than we've ever been. So it's a fact that child poverty has been halved in the last 30 years. We've had access to tech, has enabled a leveling of the playing field that is unprecedented in terms of access to education, access to information, but we don't seem to be using it in the right way. So as a blanket statement, the way we're going isn't going to work for very long, I think. I don't think it's without its benefits, but the way it's currently structured, it's too much for too few.
Good. Okay, thank you, Emma. And Rom, over to you on your sunny balcony. What's your take of this particular topic? It can be a different take. It doesn't need to be along the same rabbit hole, but what's your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the economy and the workers within it, we've sort of seen the rise of the gig economy and self-employment across sort of multiple sectors and categories. But the world of kind of professional work, mid to senior level particularly, remains sort of culturally largely untouched, and a lot of practices remain in this this sort of office-based 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And now we're sort of forced into this step change. And I think a lot of people are realizing that they don't want to go back. It's not going to work for them. And it'll be interesting to see how companies respond to that, and whether we can, I mean, I certainly think that there's an opportunity to be leveraged there as well, and not just get humans and professionals to work in this factory-like way, but really sort of unlock the human mind and the potential that comes with that.
Thank you very much, Rom. And Prashant, what's your take from over in Canada?
Well, to begin with, I would like to take this one level above capitalism and talk about it as industrialism. So that, that allows me to incorporate all those other systems about communism and everything that's happened since in the post-industrial world. I think one of the main problems is that we've been reduced to, in spite of all this money, that all this disposable income we're getting, we've all been reduced to the level of survival, in a sense. We're basically just workers and consumers, and we have creative needs, we have spiritual needs that we don't have the space to really explore in our modern day and age. And I would say, as for the bit about lifting people out of poverty, I think it was a poverty that industrialism created in the first place, to an extent. One could easily argue that. Yes. So I think in a sense, I mean, from what, if you have to say capitalism or industrialism or whatever, it basically tries to solve the problems it creates in the first place. So that's the real. I mean, you have the destruction of the rural economy is one could argue is what created poverty in the first place.
Right. So it's a Cerberus. I can see that. I like that link. Okay. Thank you, Prashant. Matt from Bristol.
Yeah. I mean, look, much of the same. Where I've been sort of mentally on this for quite a while is just that feeling that the unchallengeable belief, generally speaking, that wealth creation and consumerism and a small percentage of that benefit being rechanneled into, our more societal needs, be that, healthcare, education, etc., is just proving itself now that when that was set up with the assumption that we could continually grow and that our depletion of resources wasn't a consideration, it just wasn't seen to be perceived as a threat. Now it clearly is. It's observing the fact that we have a system which a lot of people have been indoctrinated into believing that is necessary to give back and support us in our more in our wider needs, where I feel there's an opportunity to discuss how we could reverse that completely, so that rather than having reward assigned to material wealth, that we start to see human beings and the talents that they possess as the gold in the first place, which then can generate income to then be spent.
Yeah, and so to actually, that's a great circular loop back to Emma's point, which is that the system that we have isn't going to get us where we need to get to. Emma, taking from Matt's point back to yours, do you feel that when we're thinking about what an alternative way could be, there is a danger of us running immediately into the barriers of how anything could actually be overthrown or adjusted? And are we better to consider things without those barriers in place and just think, we'll worry about how to actually get around the system after we've worked out what good looks like? Or should we actually, how much do we need to be respectful of the existing infrastructure when we're thinking about these alternatives?
Okay, so I feel like we're getting onto my favourite subject, which is revolution. I'm just kidding. Right, yeah. I mean, although it is, and there's a WhatsApp group, you know where it is. I think, so first of all, we have to bear in mind that the economy is made up. Some people created this. It's not a truth. It's not gravity. Whereas if I drop my phone, it falls to the floor. That's a truth. Our financial systems are a myth or a religion or a cult that we've all put our hands up and said, yeah, I'm going to believe in that. Sure, I'll go along with this. So we can change anything we want, number one. Number two, I think you have to ask, is it working, and who's it working for? And look at the numbers. How do people feel about this? What are they able to do? What's social mobility? And I think you then have to move on to, as you say, what does good look like? What does happiness look like? What does fulfillment look like? Is it money? I don't think so. I think money has just taken the place of power in terms of motivation. And I think there's a complete redesign needed. So I have quite a strong background in UX and design. And one of the first you always return to fundamentals. is it working? Why isn't it working? And what does it need to do? Like, so forget about what's here. If you could have an ideal, what does that ideal look like?
Got it. Good. I like that. And so, and Rom, and I'm not always going to go around this carousel, but I thought I'd just do twice around. Rom, do you feel that, coming from Emma's point and from Matt's point, in this circle we're in, are there any obvious glaring structural ways in which we could actually address this problem? Or is there an overarching philosophy of maybe moving from a for-profit to a for social value? I saw you nodding quite vigorously when Emma said that, is the money tool, the control mechanism money, is that the right shining star or not? And so do you feel that there's a philosophical move from a for-profit to for social value theme there?
Yeah, I do, although I think that is a longer term and harder thing to achieve, but I think ultimately it's the right thing to do and the way that the world will naturally move. In terms of sort of practical steps, it does feel like we're at a point that we should revisit universal basic income, and I'm sure this is going to come up in this conversation. I mean, the government is basically kind of implementing something like it, albeit within pockets across society, because humans are naturally hierarchical. That's why I think Emma's point is, although it's good, it's a difficult one to implement. Whereas if we just had this kind of blanket universal basic income, and I know it has its problems, but it feels like this natural step change to seriously review it and implement it, frankly.
Prashant, what's your take on that? Oh, he's done the old not muted thing. That's normally me. I'm glad that it wasn't me. I've been really careful to always unmute myself this time. I'm really chuffed with myself. I'm not going to rub it in, though. I'm not going to make a point about it. Hey, Prashant, over to you.
So I think one possible solution could be the localization of economies rather than the current model, which follows like a large centralized economy. Maybe the restoration of rural economies, smaller. I mean, making everything smaller essentially, rather than the massive size to which everything has grown. It was get rid of these massive impersonal superstructures and bring everything down to a smaller human level. And economists could also take a more human approach to economics rather than simply making it, just crunching numbers, looking at human happiness and is human happiness being achieved and that kind of stuff.
Matt, you and I have spoken about Prashant's point before, and to some extent, even when we were in a band together 30 years ago, we probably accidentally even wrote songs about it. We had one song called "Dumping on the Fish," which was our first environmentally friendly song, which I thought that was really cool. So when
hang on, is this all just a big advert for yours and Matt's reunion as a band? Is that what you're doing now?
That's right.
All right.
Yeah, but you weren't supposed to say it on the recording. That was supposed to be subliminal, because every 3 minutes there's this flash of the webcast of the new. No, anyway, so yeah. So Matt, when we discussed this point and Prashant's point, you and I can go down the route of, right, we need to destroy this, take this down, and whatever. Emma and I have also come up with various revolutionary ideas, including storming the House of Parliament in time. And so we've, there's different ways. Oh, now she's denying it. So Matt, do you feel that there is any merit in, are we talking about the abolition of things as much as we're actually talking about adjustment of things? How radical do we need to be here? Oh, he's done the mute trick again. So I'm not even the second mute person. He's the second. I'm now the third. He's still on mute.
Hello?
Now he's off mute.
Oh, does it mute itself after a while, does it?
I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I actually muted you because you didn't go on mute automatically. So I'll take that one. We'll be joint second.
Yeah. If you I'm gonna be really good, because on my phone I don't get that little button. Like if I look now, it's not there.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm gonna be really good, and I'm self-muting. you know, I'm setting an example in some kind of way. I don't need an authority to mute me. I can self-mute. I'm
right,
setting an example.
Yeah, all right, Rage Against the Machine then. Okay, right, so anyway, go for it.
So yeah, look, I've always thought and hoped that there will be an opportunity to just blow the thing up and rethink, but I would always come to this point when talking to others that would, you know, understandably to a degree in the setting that we were a month ago, just frame it as idealistic and just not possible, because the machine and the frameworks that we were working in were just so unstoppable that it was just something that would not happen. But we would always come to this conclusion, more often than not, that because of the nature of human beings, it takes an absolute disaster for you to suddenly wake up and have to adapt. And so, as much as like anyone else, you know, the loss of human life and that side of things, which is something we're facing now, it's, to me, represents an absolute opportunity to almost freeze dry what we have at the moment, park it, and it's creating this space for creative thinking and to and almost create an alternative in tandem, and understand that right now, and you can see it happening, you know, day by day, that people are trying to do what they can within the systems that exist. And you can see that, you know, governments are, you know, incrementally recognizing that change needs to happen, but they're still doing it within, you know, the context of what they have to work with now and the financial levers they can use. But almost in tandem, there is this opportunity to start, you know, reinventing an alternative, because, you know, we've got these two universes going on, and one of them is effectively ground zero.
Okay, and
can I just make
Emma,
a really small point here?
Go for it.
Sorry. We've seen that throughout history, most revolutions end up replacing one system for another one that ends up being exactly the same. And Tironi's point is always hierarchical, is always pointing upwards, resources, wealth, ease, etc., etc. So if that hasn't worked, then we need to stop doing the same thing. So if everything we've done before hasn't quite worked, then that means logically we need to do something different. And I think that it's the mindset that needs to change before we can change the systems that we operate in. And I'll give you a really small kind of silly example. Quite often when I coach people, I ask them, how do you stress release? How do you make yourself feel good? And a lot of the time they say things like, I order a pizza, have a glass of wine, sit down in front of Netflix, see my friends. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I ask them a question about what makes them feel good. When did you last feel really satisfied? When did you feel fulfilled? And they say things like, I went for a walk outside, I went and saw my mum, or I volunteered, or or I did something creative. So those two things are completely different. But when you talk about how people feel, what do they actually makes them feel satisfied and fulfilled? It's not consumerism. It's not what we're told. It's something different. And that's, I think, would be key in solving what we're up against now, is that mindset change and actually being a bit more conscious of what actually makes you feel good, what actually motivates you, what actually can provoke the biggest change.
Well, that was sort of my, I'll just jump in here, but that was
please do.
That was my opening argument, actually, that we've been reduced to worker and consumer. These are the dominating themes of our lives, you know, the sort of the predominant themes of our life. We aren't really given that kind of space to do those things that we find meaningful.
Yeah. And who would like to speak to that point, Rom or Matt, perhaps?
Yes, I'd agree. I think that I think there could well be an opportunity, though, to, you know, accept that, you know, taking the previous points about, you know, human beings are hierarchical by nature, and trying to marry that with, you know, a preferred approach of redesigning a system which is, you know, is clearly not giving us what we need, is to maybe just work within a hierarchical system, but just to redefine that hierarchy in terms of what we reward. so that there would a new hierarchy would emerge, but it was a much more based in altruism and kind of closer to aligned to kind of personal growth and the things that make us feel content.
Okay, so we have a kind of almost two ways, a duality of a lens to look at this. On one hand, we've got the using the structures that we have and replacing the values of the structure. And then the other version is that the structures are actually based on control and greed. Therefore, even replacing the values of the structures, we'll end up with a different version of control and greed, except we'll use other things as controlling and greed. Ron, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think replacing the values is noble, but it's a challenging thing to do. The thing I like about replacing the structure as such is it acknowledges some of the practical realities that we do actually get a lot of benefit from working as well in the professional workforce, and it's not all bad, and it does contribute, etc., etc. But also, if we break down the structures and we acknowledge that we can work much more flexibly, we probably don't need to work the amount of hours that historically we've had to due to automation and all sorts of things that are changing now, then that gives us as humans the freedom and the space to get that creativity, enjoyment, that sense of community, which is frankly coming about because of a global viral pandemic. And it's bringing out all of those qualities of humanity, in part because they're extremely natural. So what happens when we all go back to working ridiculously, commuting ridiculously, being in the office just tunnel vision, is all of those basic human things will go away. And I think that's what we need to latch onto and make time for that.
Emma, is this possible? From in your head, you were saying about the mindset is the starting point, the shifting of mindset. I mean, to reveal my cards, obviously I totally agree with that. It's the reason why my everything is around thinking and how we think up, how we train our thought muscle and stuff. But even though you and I, Emma, agree on the point of it being a mindset first approach, what Rom's saying and what we're all discussing here, is it possible without a revolution? Is it possible to actually enable some form of idea virus to spread into the mindsets of people who are multi-generational Roman Empire structuralists, capitalists, industrialists? How does that mindset shift? Is it possible without some form of overthrowing or revolution? And Matt, I'll pass on to you after that. What do you think, Em?
Million %. To use a mathematically accurate term. I think the other shift that needs to happen is that we do too much. Even though we're talking about humanity and connection, we do too much based on emotion and how we feel, and how we see that as a truth. We see instinct as a truth. And it is the literal opposite of truth, because it always involves bias, and it always involves self-interest, and it involves fear and all these other things. I think the other shift that we need to see, and then maybe we won't actually need to scrap all the structure that we have already. A lot of it exists because it works to some degree. So I don't think it's all trash. The other shift that I would put in place is that I would create societies that were science-led, that were logic-led. Our politicians are all PR people. None of them, or hardly any of them, are economists. Hardly any of them are scientists. Hardly any of them are mathematicians that can actually model things. They're good at getting people to agree with them. And that's not the leadership. And it's the leadership that we hold up and say, this is, these people are, they're idolized for their rhetoric. Ro knows all about this from, employment and work without bias. When you blind recruit people, you get to skill sets rather than bias, rather than personality. I think that's what we should be doing for our government. We should have people in place that actually have the skills to map this out. It would be lovely if we could suddenly go to much smaller, tiny groups, but the problem with small, tiny groups is that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and they're open to abuse as well when you don't know what's happening in other parts of the world, when we don't know what's happening in other parts of the country. Okay. And tech has facilitated us knowing about that. But the other leverage that I think guides that is let's be science led.
Okay.
Because science is not about not just about numbers. It is about emotion. It is about quality of life, and it is about fulfillment. Like there is like the science of happiness. And I think with those two things in place, we would be able to provoke a lot of change in quite a short amount of time.
Okay, so I'm going to go Matt, then Prashant, then Rom. So Matt, just as a segue to that, what would you like to build upon that? And I'd like you to include, if you could, in your answer, whether or not the existing governmental structure would even allow a meritocracy to replace itself. Anyway, so go for it. You first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, on the point of an idea of virus, I think yes, theoretically it could be effective. My only concern is because of the nature of that and the timescales that we are working in terms of climate change. I worry that it would not be quick enough. That could be a very beautiful, subtle way of achieving change in time, but just historically it takes too long, and it therefore could be too late. I would agree again on the science-led point, although I think it does also depend on your definition of science, because if you are wanting to incorporate a kind of spiritual element to this, or a faith element, for want of a better word, which would also, pull more people with you, you've got to acknowledge that within science itself, there is always an element of faith. Theories will start with a hunch, for want of a better word, and over time, science will find definitions to explain what started off as a much more kind of guttural, spiritual driver. So absolutely, and I couldn't agree more that you need people in the background modeling this stuff. You need this balance of kind of visionaries and pragmatists who can take these ideas and put them into working models in the way that is happening with the coronavirus right now, and saying, well, let's take scenario A, B, and C, let's model it and see what happens. And we need those scientists to be driving that. Your point about governmental structure at the moment, really good point. I think that would need reform as well, because I think within those structures, even if you brought in a big influx of scientists and mathematicians and the reinstatement of experts, if they are still working directly with people that are bound to this old model, they could find themselves hand-tied and manipulated. So you would need to create an environment where they could practice their scientific, flex their scientific muscles unrestricted.
Good, and we're going to come back to that in a second as well. Actually, I like to go down an alt-gov parallel situation conversation as well. So Prashant, over to you, and then Rom. What's your take on what we've discussed? With the mute button. I'm not sure the mute button is that hard. I mean, normally I lose it, but I actually have my finger directly over it the whole time now. Okay, Prashant, over to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Well, I think my problem with using a completely logical approach is that we haven't discovered this absolute pure logic just yet. I mean, the concept of growth economics at its root is based on someone's idea of logic. I mean, that's the, a lot of economics is sort of, I think it should be a blend of both. I think bring the logical aspect and the human aspect and use them to balance each other out. I think there's also the bit about the people in charge being more in touch with the people who voted them in. Actually, the old stories about the king going about town in disguise to listen to what his subjects are saying. That's sort of metaphor. So I think you have on the one hand you do have the high level projections, but you shouldn't let you lose touch with what's really going on, because ultimately there are lots of unquantifiable things about life in general.
Okay, Thanks, Prashant. Rom, over to you, and then Emma, you can speak to the points that we've discussed. Yes, Rom.
Yeah, so I mean, controversially, compared to some of my friends, I actually think the government's response has been pretty good, fairly comprehensive. But what is clear is, there's some very easy steps that they can take, not just in response to this crisis, but in general, about diversifying the team. And most of you would have read Matthew Syed's Rebel Ideas, where he talks about how most of the world's uncomplicated problems have been solved now and can be done in quite a linear way. But the very complicated problems needs a lens from multiple different angles. And, very diverse teams tend to do that better. And if you just take the Treasury, for example, and they announce the changes that they would make to employed workers and the support that they would offer businesses for employed workers, actually, if you look at the sector that was the most disrupted in hospitality, it's got the highest percentage of self-employed workers. And it just probably needed 3 or 4 people within Treasury at that decision-making point who had worked in self-employed roles and had friends who did that kind of work to have realised that that was the problem they needed to tackle first, because the waterfall effect to employed people would come in a couple of weeks. So that's just a very small example, but I think it's quite an easy change to make, to just tackle diversity, ethnicity, gender and social mobility across the board, but particularly at leadership. Okay.
And Emma, what's your view?
So that's a great point from Rom, and I kind of loop it back to, if you want to be science-led, science says that diverse teams do better, diverse companies do better, diverse societies do better. There's more empathy, there's better communication, they come up with better ideas, they get to solutions quicker. And we know this. The numbers are in. If you look at McKinsey, if you look at all the Ivy League universities in the States, they've all got gold standard research to this point. And it's absolutely, I think it's what helped push tech so quick so far, is that people who didn't fit the mold in this old way of working suddenly had somewhere to go, suddenly had somewhere to unleash their creativity. And that's why we've seen such an exponential growth of startups and solutions coming out to problems some people didn't know existed, but suddenly they made a lot of money, they reached a lot of people, they changed a lot of lives. So I think that's actually, I would add that to the trifecta because it's so important.
Okay, and well said. And Matt, if there were to be if I said to you, imagine a scenario where somehow there was a social mass class action lawsuit against every politician, and the entire House of Commons was arrested and marched into prison, and there was an opportunity for the public to create the public's government for the benefit of the people. Do you, and this is just a crazy scenario just to run past you, but it's just to test this edge of thought. Who would you, if you could wave a magic wand and do this, who would you put in place to run the country if the existing structure was arrested?
Wow. I think, well, the diversity thing is absolutely crucial. I think you would need to have, rather than sort of breaking it down in terms of, what type of person, my thinking about what a government would look like is almost a reflection on a comment that you hear very regularly when, particularly during general elections, and subject matters like the NHS, and people, the general public will get very frustrated and start talking about, why will you not just talk cross-party? Why will you stop point scoring? And in my ideal scenario, what you would have is, rather than having a collection of people that maybe represented different ideologies that were specifically set out to defeat each other and point score, that what you would have is a government that were considered neutral and almost like, in many ways, a company which has set out a mission statement which they might review every 3 or 4 years. And it wouldn't mean that if things weren't working, that company would get replaced with a completely different one. They might just tweak a few policies so that gradually you would have votes around particular thought processes that either had worked and everybody was happy with, and for the ones that weren't delivering, that's what the discussion was about, so that you ended up having a government that was neutral.
Right. And just to test that to you, if a cynic could argue that we're a nation of sun readers, would we as a country in the UK, and maybe let's scan that for the rest of the world, do we feel that that's actually what people want? Is it what people want? Or in fact, are there very few people with ideologies and very many people with comfort zone binary thinking that's looking for people we need a common enemy, so we need a protagonist, then we have the hero, and maybe there's a romance story and a bit of intrigue and some, and you mix it all together and you get a perfect Hollywood movie, stroke US presidency, stroke Brexit. So with what you're saying, it would seem like, do we also need the public to actually want that? Because I suspect actually the public quite like having an enemy that they hate. It's Boris has made sure that, we're in this, or it's Labour had got in, then we wouldn't have had that. Or, if there was a female prime minister, if Maggie was still around, do we not always need an enemy? Do we not always need a protagonist?
It's a good point, and I think that again, with what is going on now, and obviously, look, working with the appreciation that we all live in our own bubbles and our own echo chambers, but whether it's looking at life through an over-optimistic lens, but I certainly feel that desire has started to reduce as a response to what's going on. That again, this to me represents an opportunity now, because people's thinking seems to be shifting. That I have seen less angry rhetoric blaming Boris or blaming Brexit or whatever, that there seems to be much more appreciation of, things are much more interconnected, and the things that we were being told to value, that is no longer the case. So I think that in the current environment, actually, we might have an opportunity to explore that, and it might be better received than we think.
Good. Rom, I'm going to come to you, and then Prashant and Emma. Rom, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what was just said. And the only thing I'd really add is that I think the media plays a huge role in shaping all of this. I completely agree that the sort of angry rhetoric towards Boris seems fairly muted, but in part because Boris has been out in front with the media. He knows exactly how to play that game very, very well. And for better or for worse, they are with him, I think, in terms of the reporting and reporting positively on behalf of the government, which is possibly the right thing to do at the moment to get everyone in line. But, in general, let's take this crisis to one side for a second. Going back to your point about people and storytelling and so on, I think one of the biggest dangers is we've forgotten how to think, and we like to reduce very complicated things down into just simple sound bites, and Dominic Cummings was the master at that. Where is that guy now, by the way? With all his misfits, where is he?
Writing speeches for Nigel Farage.
I mean, he doesn't know what a public service is, I don't think. Anyway, I guess the point that I'm making there is, we definitely have a role in society to just think a little bit more, but I think that now is the time to regulate the media as well. It's run riot for far too long.
That is a massive point. Prashant, over to you, bearing in mind you're a writer.
I think, on the whole, I'd like to see a new humanism, which is sort of like what happened during the Renaissance. Actually, and this might seem like a small point, but I think the humanities need to be revived. Philosophy, poetry, all those classical things, because right now, because that's what actually makes us human, has us thinking imaginatively, critically, And those things are missing. I think that space that used to be occupied by all those things is occupied by entertainment and consumerism and all those things. So I think a more enlightened, at the level of schools and all that, if you want people to start thinking in a different way, I think the humanities need to make a comeback.
I could not agree more. Emma, over to you.
I love the idea of regulating the media, and I'm a huge proponent of free speech, but I'd fucking do it. I saw something on Twitter the other day where some blue-ticked person was saying that they couldn't believe the latest thing from the Daily Mail app, a push notification, and what can we do about this? So I was like, you could not fucking click on it. You could not have the app. You could stop playing a part in this quite easily by ducking out, because guess what? No clicks means no company, means no publishing platform. So I think, I love the idea of doing that. Unfortunately, it's really hard to implement something like that without looking too heavy-handed or without giving ammunition to the wrong people. But it could definitely be better handled. And I think everyone just needs to go back and watch Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin's amazing TV series, for
Legendary.
everything you need to know about how the media should be handled.
Totally.
There isn't always two sides to a story. Sometimes that's one. We are biased towards fairness. Oh, everyone deserves to speak. Does Nigel Farage deserve to speak on the BBC? I'm not sure. I'm not sure he does.
And what I find interesting is we have the whole kind of who guards the guards there, because if we were to actually regulate the media, the question is who is the regulator of the media, and under what moral code are they operating? And if I personally speaking, my one of the reasons why I've always liked some outlets in the past, Al Jazeera was one where they were actually on the front line reporting as it was. They didn't dress it up. It's just like, these people are dying right now of poverty. This is what's actually happening. They don't then spin it into a clickbait. It's like, it's literally like, start filming, stream it immediately. And for rightly or wrongly, they'll stream the announcements by the Taliban. They'll stream frontline drought systems. They'll stream whatever, right? And it's kind of free media. It's free press. And so I liked that free flow.
And there's a difference between documenting and regurgitating and doing an op-ed piece. Those two things are very, very different.
Yeah, and it's driven by, back to Prashant's point from earlier, I think that it's driven by incentive of what's the actual driver. And if the driver is commercial upside from advertising revenue and clicks, then you're certainly not going to be in documenting what's going on. You're going to be thinking, how can we get more advertising revenue and more clicks, right? Prashant, back to you then. I'm going to go to Matt and Rom, and then obviously back to Emma. Prashant, over to you. Do you feel that there is that we are addressing the question from, and this is the final 10 minutes dropping this bombshell, do we think we're looking at this question all wrong? Are we actually looking at a government problem, a system problem, a systemic problem, a for-profit capitalism system problem? Whereas what we should be doing is looking at this from an ideological perspective and get the ideology right, then work out how that ideology could transfer into a workable system. Are we trying to be too practical here, and should we be more arguably esoteric to start with, and manifesto led?
Probably. I mean, I think change has to start at the level of human desire. You have the Aristotelian hierarchies. The individual first, the family after, the village, and the cities. So I think maybe change really does need to start at the level of the individual, and that can start with education, getting people interested in thinking and reading, and you have to ask yourself. You complain about corporations. Well, I mean, why do corporations exist? Because we like the convenience they give us, and maybe there should be a lot more human beings taking responsibility for the mess that exists. The highest, because what's happening at the highest level reflects what's happening on the ground to an extent. So the reason corporations are powerful is because, well, we like the six-figure salaries they give us and the convenience they give us. The reason politicians, I mean, yeah. So maybe, so I think, yeah, maybe change can be you can take another approach to change, not just political.
Yeah, and as Emma's saying, the reason why those apps, the Daily Mail app is popular is because we've made it popular.
Yeah.
It's equally not less popular if people don't click on it. So Matt, what's your view in terms of, are we talking actually about an individual change perspective outward, and that then can manifest itself into a structural reorganization, or do we need to do both? Or do we not have enough time to do the individual first? What's your view?
Again, I would say that right now we have an opportunity to do both, because there is, governments are under massive pressure to respond to this. So at that level, there is a requirement for much more flexible, agile thinking. But on an individual basis, when a month ago, I would have said, we are way too much in the sheep mentality. It's a lovely idea, but if you ask the individual to drive this, they're not going to do it. They're just so used to following and consuming, good luck with that. But right now, you look at the massive burst of creative thinking because people have been forced into a situation where they've got to amuse themselves, and they're engaging with the arts, and they're engaging with with social media in a completely new way. And there is this amazing burst of imaginative thinking. So I think, again, at the moment, the two could be working in tandem.
There are those who are engaging with porn as well. I mean, there's probably a lot of those out there.
Apparently sex toys sales have gone through the roof. Yeah, it's true. Rom, I can't remember if it was Rom or Emma next. First to unmute yourself. All right, okay. Right, Emma, over to you. What's your take, Emma?
I like a two-pronged approach, as I do think we are rapidly running out of time, and I think we're so much smarter and we're so much better than this. I think I'm a proponent of the individual, as you know, but it's got to take place on multiple levels. I think it would be reductionist and simplistic to say this is where we start and this is going to work. I think we just have to start trying. We have to start experimenting. We have to start doing different things and seeing where we get to.
Okay. And Rom, what's your thought of that? If you're still with us, or she actually? Well, in which case, while we're waiting for Rom to rejoin, I must admit, in the final 6 minutes, what I'd like to pose to you is a question, an idealistic question to some extent. But do we think that if there was a Rom, did you want to add to the point?
No, okay. The reason I'm fiddling around is I keep swapping my charger out and in because I'm at 2%. So
right, okay.
Let's skip me.
Fine, okay. And feel free to go off video if you want, despite the fact that you do have the best view of everyone's video. But anyway, the final question is this. If there were to be a new political party that was kind of like the Human Party, and it went into the existing political system as it is, didn't try and restructure it, just went in through the normal channels, through a member of parliament, seat in the House, somehow managed to lobby itself into a position of influence. Do you believe right now that could be a way of affecting real change from the top part of the pincer approach? We're talking about the duality. You've got the individual first, and then we've got the structural part as well. Do we think that would there be any merit in creating the Human Party, where there are 14.5 million signatories toward it, and actually forces in some form of representation that is actually louder than any form of controlled bought media, and louder than any binary politicians who are actually puppet shows? Would a Human Party be of merit? Matt first.
Oh, I don't think so at the moment, just purely and simply because of the tools that exist to resist that. I mean, you could argue that the Human Party to some degree has existed in the form of maybe a combination of elements of Labour, elements of the Green Party, and elements of the Lib Dems. And whenever there's been talk of some kind of collaboration, and even talking about trying to get proportional representation in, it just falls down because there's too many tools to be able to resist that. So I'm not
just
sure.
Good point. And I just to add to that, or not necessarily to counter, but what I'm using as an ideological standpoint is Live Nation. So Live Nation came along, and I remember speaking to them right at the early days, just around about the time I was the chairman of the British music industry, so 2000, 2001. And they come along and they're saying, listen, we think it's going to be live performances, merchandise, ticket sales. That's actually where it's going to be. It's not going to be in licensing content anymore. Content's going to be free. It's all going to go digital, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to take over live events, and then we're going to sign artists, and then we're going to give artists a bigger, the record industry at that point were expensing Porsches, right? So that no one in the record industry even saw Live Nation actually come along in this disruptive way. And so and Live Nation basically just went to all the artists and all the venues and all the ticket merchants and just said, yeah, we just kind of think we can do it in an alternative way. And then without anyone really realizing, Universal go down like this, EMI go down like this, it's now a WordPress blog, Live Nation go up like this. And I'm wondering whether or not a Live Nation type approach, maybe there is enough frailty, especially if the human party started to use the law against the system and go, well, actually, out of you 345 politicians, at least 265 of you have actually broken the fucking law. So we're going to start there. I'm just wondering whether that's something that could be looked at. But Matt, I hear what you're saying, that there are structures in place to stop it happening. I think I've actually said that to you myself.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, that's a really good point as well, because what you've just done really effectively there is point out that my statements were based on minimal knowledge of the laws. It's just my perception that these laws are all stacked against us. But yeah, if you had enough people that knew the law well enough, then absolutely it could be more of a possibility than I think. So for sure.
Yeah, Emma and I have been talking about this for a while, and so Emma will come to you last. Prashant, because you can do the mic drop. Prashant, what's your version of that? What were we just saying?
Yeah, I mean, human party is a great idea, but I don't think it's going to work unless you tackle the middle class apathy.
Yes.
And I don't think that's going to, because I think that's the biggest obstacle to any sort of meaningful transformation of society. Right now, there's still a culture that people just want to, eat what's dropped into their mouth, pretty much, So I think that's got to be tackled. And I think one of the solutions to that is a real sort of educational renaissance at the level of education.
Right.
That kind of.
So the inertia that happens in the middle classes now, we don't worry about addressing that. We tackle the younger generations so that there is less middle class inertia and apathy by the time they grow up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
got it.
At present, the education system just teaches you how to work, how to be
totally
employable skills. That's all.
Better factory, more compliant factory workers. Okay, Rom, because you've got about 1% battery left, have you got anything to say in closing?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea in theory, and I love the idea of increased representation. I think in reality, politics is both complicated and boring. And once the sort of initial buzz is worn off, how sustainable can that be? And we saw that with the sort of centralist movement of the Change Party that happened last year, and other sort of false starts as well. They rely on kind of a PR bang, but then who's actually going to execute on those ideas? I think the reform, that being said, I'm wholeheartedly behind reform. I just think that needs to come in if we go top down, and there's more diversity at the top, and therefore more ideas, more thinking through problems from every single lens rather than just for the good of one sector of society. That will make vast improvements overnight.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you, Rom. And Emma, over to you for the closing words.
So massively agree with Romney there. I think if you look at every decision, if you trace back over the last 100 years, and you looked at every decision that has really fucked us as a society, and put that decision onto a table that was diverse, we would not be where we are. I think diversity knocks out a huge percentage of our problems and a huge percentage of the negative effects where we find ourselves in. It just does. So I think if you wanted to take a bet, that was where you would start. My other point would be is that if you really wanted me to bet everything on how do we make this change happen, I think it would have to be done kind of incognito. We have to go through the current structures, we have to work with the law, and we'd have to go right to the inside and work its way out, because standing on our sofas and shouting at the TV doesn't do anything. And in to quote Newsroom, it's easier to bet on the left if they just didn't lose all the time. And they need to start being smart about this, and they need to start being as smart as the people who are causing these problems. And that means knowing how to get people on board. That means knowing how to reach into their deepest motivations and help match them with what they want to do. Because what we're currently doing hasn't been working, so we need to change it.
Well said. Okay, well, thank you all. We've come to the end of our time together for this time. Perhaps we will redo this conversation in a week's time. We've got, arguably fuck all else to do, so we may as well actually talk about this. So I will wrap this up now, and who knows, maybe there will be another. I would like to have another follow-up conversation, and just, if nothing else, than just to see
next time. Maybe
drinks.
With drinks next time.
Prashant, you've been talking about that for 3 years. Every single time you're on a video call with me, you're like, you know what we should do? We should integrate alcohol. You've never stopped saying it. And I love that for you. I love that. It's great. You're consistent and you constantly said it. So, okay, next time we'll do a drinking version. I think that might be quite late for us, Prashant, or early for you. So if you're okay with starting, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? So if you're okay starting kind of like middle of the afternoon.
I'm going to start being an early drinker now, It's probably...
That's a great idea. Yeah, my partner and I have started that as well. It's going great. So, okay, so we will do a drinks party next time. Thank you very much, Matt, Prashant, Rom, and Emma. I really appreciate this, the inclusion, and I'm hoping that anyone watching this is in some way inspired, and let's keep this traction going. I will send you guys the video. Of course, you can post it everywhere you like, and thank you anyone for watching. If you're out there, whenever you watch this, maybe you're watching this in 5 years time going, that's the conversation that inspired us to do X, Y, and Z. That'd be great, but only because I'd like to have a legacy for my
those are our
children.
Global world leaders. Yeah,
that's right. I think I've just created the human party. Okay, right. Okay.
Thank you very much for organising.
Yeah, great facilitation, John. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Dana.
See you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.